Building REST API with .NET 6. How to build product faster and better by utilizing web standard and REST API and building API using database agnostic with .NET 6. Hi guys, my name is Ramneek and today you are going to learn uh, how to build REST API and using .NET, and we will also look into the .NET roadmap. And we will see what is the difference between .NET 5 and .NET Scope 6. And in this particular demo, we will do the evaluation of .NET 6 by building REST API. And we will quickly define what will be the scope of work for this demo. And then we will see REST API in action. The prerequisite for this demo that you have some basic understanding of software development landscape. So it would be better if you have watched my previous video, this particular one, where I have explained how modern web application development works. And apart from that, you must have some knowledge of C# and ASP.NET Core, because this will be the hands-on on coding. So it's better you know these two technologies. Okay, so now let's understand what is the scope and role of API. So basically, if you build any web application, there is a presentation layer, database layer, and the API layer. And API is the most important layer. And for this demo, we are going to build API. And there are two types of API. One is called GraphQL, and another one is called REST-based API. So we are not going to work on GraphQL. We are going to work on REST-based API for this particular demo. And we are going to build an API in such a way that it doesn't matter if we use SQL or no SQL. So our API will be common, and we will not be able to. We don't even need to change the API just by changing the the database layer. Okay, so now let's understand why .NET. So basically, there are many ways to build APIs. For this particular demo, we will use .NET technology, and even for .NET, there are various versions available for .NET. The most recent version is .NET 5, and the upcoming next official version is .NET 6, which is coming in November, but it is already available in a preview release. That is what we are going to evaluate today. So now let's understand what is .NET 5. So we can build various type of application in .NET 5, but like, for example, we can build desktop app, we can build web app, cloud native apps, mobile apps, gaming app using Unity and so on, and IoT app, as well as the AI based app. But our focus will be on just web-based application development, ASP.NET. So now let's see .NET 6. So in .NET 6, there will not be a much difference between .NET 5 and .NET 6, especially for ASP.NET Core-based development. So in .NET 6, they are changing cross-platform native AI, cross-platform web API, and some other work, but they are not touching ASP.NET Core between 5 and 6. So we should be able to evaluate that thing easily. So now let's define a scope of work. So basically, in this demo, we are going to build 5 services, which will cover the proper CRUD, create, update, read, and delete. So in this demo, we are going to build 5 services. So it will be just like 5 units of work, and we are going to use standard HTTP verbs to build REST API. Like for creating a book, we are going to use post verb. For updating a book, we are going to use put verb. For deleting, we will use delete verb. And for get a single book or all the books, we are going to use HTTP get verb. Let's also define the scope of work. The primary goal of this demo is to evaluate .NET 6, for building a REST API. So it will not be, full-fledged development for these API, because, if we have to build 5 units of work, it takes, like at least 40 hours. And if we have to build the same thing under 1 hour, so we have to define what we will do and what we will not do. So there are a few things which are not negotiable. The things are like, it should be standard-based API development, and our code should be database agnostic, so that we don't need to change our API layer if we are changing one DB to another. But there are things, if we have to build these many units under 1 hour, so we have to define what we are not going to do. So we will not spend time writing automated unit testing code. We will not work on writing extensive error handling, and we will not even spend time on code commenting or API commenting, or any kind of documentation. And we will use simple schema so that this kind of work can be developed. Okay, now let's build the actual code. Let's start Visual Studio and let's create a new project. So we are going to build REST API. So our focus is just REST, and we are going to use C# as a technology. So out of those choices, one is MVC. We are not going to build MVC because our focus is just pure API. So the next choice we have is .NET Core Web API. It is just a project type. Let's call it book catalog. Okay, and this will be using .NET 6. We don't want .NET to generate a dummy, self-signed certificate. So let's go with a simple model. Yes, we want Open API. For this demo, let's not use Docker. Let's create. So the scope of work is building these services. So let's remember these things. So we don't need sample code. So let's get rid of sample code. We also don't need sample controller. So let's get rid of this. Okay. So now let's start with creating models. And for this whole code, we are going to use simple classes. We are not going to use any ready-made template available by Visual Studio. Let's call this book. Here we have a choice. We can use class or we can use record. But for this purpose, let's use class. So book has a identifier. So let's go with it. Let's define the data type. We are saying we want to use GUID. Yes, I'm okay with get and setter. I want to use title. I want to use title as a string. Same getter setter. I want to have a price, let's say decimal. So we have created a simple schema, ID, title, and price. So now let's make it, these fields are mandatory. So let's have some kind of basic data validation so that we don't forget those things when we are creating, the other work. So let's say this is the required. Let it figure it out, the exact library. We want to ensure all these fields are required. These data annotation is for web, when we are going to write controller, that is where we want these rules to be enforced. But it is better to start with the beginning so that when we create a multiple copies of this class as a DTO, so we don't need to worry there. So we're saying all these three items, ID, title, and price, are required. And for this price, we can give a range 0 till, let's say, 100. So we have created a simple schema. So first part is done. So now let's create a repository. So for that, let's create one more folder. Because we want to build a application which will be database agnostic. So let's go with a simple interface that, hey, these are the, so let's call it iBook. And as per our plan, we want to build 5 services. So let's have 5 methods over here, which we want to build. Okay, so now let's define what we want to build. So let's start with creating books. Let's start here. So we want books to be returned, no input. So now let's define what will be the output. Let's call it enumerable. And we want this to be returned a schema of a book. Let us figure it out this library using models. Okay, now it knows. What is, let's see what is problem. Da, 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 da. Okay, let's ignore for this right now. Public, I want to return book as a get book. As ID, I want it to have small ID. Oh, we're saying it is because we have not uh, told it to it. It is a interface, not a class. So we have covered 2 methods. One will be returning all the books, single book. Now let's get into the updating book. For creating an updating book, we don't want to return anything. So we will say void create book. What do we want as an input? We just want a book schema. For updating book, we want the same thing. Let's accept delete book. Update book. For updating a book, we want 2 parameters. First, we need to know the item which we want to update. So let's call it GOID. And we also need a book object which we want to update. So we have covered 5 functions which we want to implement in this. Okay. So interface is ready. We have schema is ready. Now let's build a repository. For repository, let's assume that we are going to use in-memory database instead of any any standard database. And for this, we want to implement our iBook interface. Let's include now let's just say let's implement all those interfaces. So we want to implement 5 functions. So we have enforced that all 5 functions are here in this repository. Okay, so now let's create a repository. So for creating a repository, let's have a list over here. We want this to have, this to be type of a list, and want this list to store only book, nothing else. And let's call it books. Let's also have a constructor so that we can have some default values here. Let's make it new. Let's have one dummy record so that we can verify this, if this is working or not. So our parameter was ID. So first let's create a new book. Let's see why it is not able to, because I have put b small. Let's make it ID. What do we want to store on ID? T.image. Yes, this is what we want. Okay. Let's see, what do we have? We have title. Let's call it dummy title 1. Or we can say book 0. And let's put some price equal, let's say 10. And let's have semicolon. So we have created one dummy record. So now we can verify if this is working or not. Okay, now let's return the data. Give me return books, and we are good over here. Now let's verify if we are able to get the data for one service. So now let's create a one service. So for that, let's create a service. For controller, name should have the word called controller, and we want to have books to be available. So books controller will be the name for this. This is a rule by ASP.NET Core. And for this class, we want to use just the API part. So we are going to use controller base. Let it figure it out the namespace, because right now it is not using any kind of ASP.NET. So let's see, it has figured it out. Yep, that is covered. So now let's define what we want. So this is the API controller, because we want to build API. Now let's define a route. We can define a route in a such a way that it can pick automatically, or we can define route the way we want. So I'm going to add my route. So I will say it should call books. Even if we change the name of this book controller, it will be still called books. Okay, so now let's have a constructor, public this book controller. Let's have a repo. Using we want our book repo, and this book repo should be based on our interface, which is iBook. Let it figure out the library. Yep. Saying at the time of initialization, let's have for now, let's assume that we are going to make a new in memory. Now let's make first function, which will be just HTTP get. And we don't need to define route for this. Let's have simple public. So we want to implement a standard based application. We don't want to write our custom code. So let's go with action result, where ASP.NET will provide all those naming convention of, like success code or error code. We also want to use our schema. For now, let's use the original schema, which is book, and we want to return all. So let's start with enumerable. We want it to return the array of books or nothing, and let it call get books. We don't want any input, and we are good over here. No, we don't want that. Let it figure it out. This library. Okay, library identified. So return our repository. We created one function called get items or get books. So it is matching, and let's see. So we have explicitly converted to a list. What is missing? Okay, and we are good. Now let's see if this is working or not. So I'm not going to run on debug mode. Let's just directly run without debugging. Let's see. Okay, so let's see if this is working or not. For this API, we have not defined any input parameters, so it should work by just clicking this. And we got our first default book. So we have created our first unit. So now let's work on other units. But before we work on other units, if you have noticed, I created this class on a constructor, and every time we are going to click on that execute, it is going to create a new class. So there is no way we can get particular book in a return. So let me show you what I'm trying to say. So if you notice, let me execute this again. So right now the ID is FF61 and so on. So if I click one more execute, it is giving me a new ID. So even if we call that thing in memory, it is not working as an in memory. So let's convert that into in memory. So for that, we have to follow the dependency injection model, and we have to say, hey, we don't want this to go like this. We want this information to come to us as a dependency injection. So let's input that thing there. Pressing iBook repo. iBook, and it will call, let's call it book repo. We want book repo to come as a parameter. So we want ASP.NET to give us our book repo, and it should not create multiple book repo every time we are, every time we are making a call to this controller, it is going to create a new book repo. To avoid that thing, we have to tell ASP.NET that it is a singleton item, that it should be loaded only once. So for item which we want to go into memory only once, and it should be shared with all the other part of the application. Let's call this, let's use singleton, and we want to use iBook interface. Let it first figure it out, the library. And then we want it to instantiate our in-memory class. And there is no parameter. So this. So now we have added this class as a singleton, and it is loaded at the time of when program is starting with, for the very first time. So now let's see if this idea is working. So earlier we were getting the new GUID every time. Let's see if we are still getting the same thing. So this time we are getting 488 F7. Let's try one more time. 48877 and 48877. So now it is working like in memory, like the way we want it. Okay, so now let's build the rest of the interfaces. Where are our interface? So these are the method which we have to work. Okay, so now let's start with create book. Before we do that, let's do something more. We don't want our schema to be visible to the consumer of this API, and we want to have full freedom to change this schema without impacting the API. So now let's create a DTO, which is a data transfer objects. Let's create one folder. Let's call this GTOs, let's call it class. Let's call it book DTO. For this, we want this class to be immutable, so we don't need to use class. We can even use decoder. So for that, let's pick what do we want to return. So it will be the same. So that is why we put all those data annotation in advance. So even if somebody do copy paste, we don't need to worry. It will have the same validation. So for book DTO, yes, we want all these things to be available. So now let's change our controller. So for here, we don't want to return our original schema. We want to return our schema, which is very specific for this API. Let's call it book DTO. Let it figure out the library. So now we are getting a book and we want to return a book DTO. So now let's solve that thing. So let's convert it. So what do we want to do over here? We want to return new book DTO. Let's make it a new line. Here we have ID. We want x.id to be used. We have a title. Let's use x.title. And we have a price. The price come from x.price. So we don't need to convert to list first. Let's first get this transformation, and then we can have return to list so that it is still matching with the enumeration. Now let's see if this idea is working or not. Error? No, we don't want it to run if there are errors. What are the errors? We have missed one curly brace. Are you happy? Is it going to work? Let's see. Yes, build started. So far, no errors. Now let's see. So earlier we were getting book schema, which was the original schema, which we don't want to share the consumer of this API. But on this, we are not sharing the original schema. We are sharing special schema built for this API, so that if we change the original schema, it will have no impact over here. So now let's see if we are still getting the data or not. Okay, so it is working. Now let's build other interfaces. So we have covered first HTTP GET. Now let's have one more. This time we don't want to return all the books. We just want to return one book, which will be the GeoID, and let it have ID. So for that we have to tell that it is expecting a parameter. This will be template based. ID, I want ID. Okay, and it will not be enumerable. It will be just one book or nothing. So we don't want to get all the books. We just want only one book. So for that, we created one service called get book. Let's pass that ID. And we want the same transformation to happen, but this time we don't want to return the whole list. We just want single record. So let's get a link library. Return video. And let's see if we have implemented this interface or not. Let's start from there. For now, let's comment it out. Let's go to in-memory interface. Let's see if we have implemented getBook. No, we have not implemented. So let's start with that. So now let's define what we want to return. Where yes, this makes okay to me. So we are saying book, but I want to find first. Or I can simply look for where clause. I want to search it where xid is the ID. Yeah, single or default, that is what I want to return. No problem here. And now let me return my book. So right now I'm not going to implement any validation or any kind of error handling. So yeah, this is the book I want to return. So there is nothing wrong over here. I have returned book. Now let's go to book controller. And now let's see if it is saying it cannot find the link. Why it is not finding the link? Because I'm getting a single and I'm expecting this bad idea. So we are saying give me where book, and this is my GUID. Oh, GUID, my parameter, and this is fine. So I got my book in a book format. Now I want to convert into a book detour format. So we are saying give me book DTO, new book DTO, and everything is same. ID is equal to my book.id and title equal book.title. And price will be no, not pro price. Equal book.price. Close this. And we are good over here. So now let's return this book DTO. Let's delete this whole. Return book DTO. Identify book DTO. Yes, you are able to identify. And this is ready. Okay. Let's see if we have any build errors, but I'm not going to run it. Let's check for basic error handling. If my book is equal to null, I want to return not found. But if book is there, I want it to return book. Now let's see if we have created one more service or not. Build errors. Good. Let's see what are the build errors. Bracket missing. Okay, where is the bracket curly brace for this function? Yep, yes, it is right. Now let's see. Oh, we have created two functions, two services. Now let's see. Okay, so this is the item. Now let's pick the ID. Now let's try to pass that ID over here. Okay, it knows that it should be GeoID. And we got a response. Code 200, success code, and we got a complete response. Now let's try to mess with it. So instead of saying F8, we say F7. Let's hope it is a valid GeoID. Let's try to execute it. And we got 404. I did not write about 404 and it is the perfect message. That is why we are using action result and it is saying, hey, it is not found. And if I remove this parameter and try to execute and saying it is mandatory because it knows that parameter is mandatory because that is how we have defined in the template. Hey, this is the template. We are saying this parameter we need for this particular service. So 2 down, how many are left? We have covered get books and get book. So now we have to cover the remaining 3. Okay, let's build those in memory. So let's start with create and update book. How do we want to create a book? So we are assuming that whoever is calling this service will provide a book interface and we will add it into our library. But we want to ensure when we are getting this book that we are providing our ID. We don't want, or we can accept, not a problem. We can put validation outside. Okay, so here is my books. I just want to add a book. That's it. So I have data validation over here, so I don't need to worry that I won't get these parameters. I will get those parameters. So let's not spend time on validation for now. So we have covered create book. Now let's see if we can create a book. So let's go on book controller. But again, we don't want to use this schema. When we are creating a new book, we don't want anyone to provide ID. We want to have our ID in place. So now let's create a new schema for data transfer. Let's call it new class. Let's call it create and update. Create all. This is a simple schema, so we can use a one common class, create or update book. TTL. We don't want to use any hot reload. Okay, so now let's pick what do we want under this. I just want to have title as well as price, and I want it to be immutable. I don't want to use class, so let's have a record. We want title and we want price to be ranged within this and this is okay. Now let's see. Let's create a method where we are going to accept this thing. Okay, so here we have to use HTTP post. So that is what we plan. And now let's make it. It will be action result. We don't want it to return anything, but it will be just action result so that it can handle any kind of error messaging and proper REST error code. And we want it to create book. And we want this service to provide a book DTO, not book DTO, create or update book DTO, which is very specific for creating and updating. Let's call it book. And from a function point of view, it won't return anything. What's your problem? Which is fine. He's saying you are not returning anything because we have used action result, so we must return either okay or error. So now let's create a new book. Where my book, let's call it my book, is equal to new book. My book dot id should be new GUID. My book dot title, give me the title. My book dot price. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my book. So I have to call my repo, my book repo, and it should have a function to create a book. I want to create a book, take my book, create my book. Okay, so now I have created a book successfully. So now let's return. Okay. So it will figure it out the meaning of okay, which is just 200. We can also return the output of get item for this particular book, but for this example, let's go with a simple. We just want to say okay, we created a book. We are not returning the URL or anything. Let's verify if we have created one more function or not. Okay, so we are seeing one more service, and it should have a one more schema, which is called create or update. So it's saying if you want to use create or update book schema, you have to provide these two. Now let's see where it is in use. So for post, it seems that is the schema which is in use. So now let's try it out. Okay, and let's say I want to call it book one. Book one, and I want to call it, let's say 25 as a price. Let's see. Okay, what happened? And we got 200 success code. Okay, let's see if we have that book or not. Let's call it out. So now I should be getting 2 records. Yep, we have 1 record and we have 2 records. This is the new book which we have created. Now so we have successfully created 3 services out of 5. So now I want to update the anything on this particular record. So for that, let's build 4th service. So for updating the existing record as per the HTTP box, as per the REST API specification, we should use HTTP put. So now let's use that HTTP put. Why are you crying? Because H is not capital. And same, we don't want to update this record without proper ID. So I'm going to say you have to provide me the ID. Okay, so now let's call it. It will be similar to create book. So let's use that. Let's call it update book. So this is the template. So in URL we should have ID, and then this value should be sent as a put request. We are going to use the same schema because we created the schema for create and update purpose, which is specific for data transfer. Here we don't want to get this book. So let's find it out. Where is my book? And we need to have this ID parameter. You're saying give me my GOID and ID. Now let's see. So this time, instead of creating new book, I will ask my repo to give me the book. Book repo get item. Get book. Just take my ID. And I have got my book. I don't want to update this thing. So I will say, give me, I just want to update title and price. Okay, so my now I have to update this book. So instead of calling create book, let's call it update book. Have we updated this function? Let's go there and check. I can click go to definition, or I can directly go here. Okay, we have not created update. Okay, so now let's see. It will be similar to get books. We don't want. But here I don't need to use where because I know I need to find the index. Find index. Okay. Equal ID. Instead of calling book, I just call book index. It is not book, it is the index. And if book index is greater than -1, then we know that it has identified the index, or it has identified the object. So now we just want to add that thing. We just want to update. So books, my book index, and the book. I don't have to return anything. Find my book. If book is there, update it. I can throw an error, but right now let's not do that. Because we have implemented a rule there. So if book is not found, it will not call this function. So let's not spend time there for now. Okay, so now we are saying update book, give me my book. Okay, so now let's see what is problem. Is saying there is no argument because we have not passed the ID. Okay, happy seems okay. We are saying if what if the ID is wrong? This idea is not going to work. So we are saying if it is not happening, we have to return at least error. If my book is null, just tell it record not found. Yep, return not found. I don't need to remember the exact error code, it will take care. Okay. Now let's see if this is working or not. So now we have a put record. But for put, we need to have some records. So let's see. So now we have only one record. We can update this one, or we can update, let's update this one. I want to change the price from 10 to, let's say, 15, and let's go book or revised. Let's go to the post. We don't, here I'm going to use the same schema, which is the creator update schema. This is my ID. I don't want to, okay, so now let's see. I want to say book zero revised and price 15. Let's see if this works. So yes, we got 200 success. Now let's verify if it is working or not. Book 0 revise and 15. Okay, now let's do basic testing. If I put something wrong, will it work? Will it return me the proper error code, which is not found? I want to say F3. Let's hope this is a valid GID, and I want to say 25. I'm going to give the wrong ID. Book revised. Let's see. It's saying 404, which is perfect. I gave the wrong ID and it was not able to identify that object. Perfect. So we have completed 4 out of 5. Let's work on the last service. It is also going to follow, the same rule. So let's call it HTTP delete. And again, on delete, we need to use same template. I want to have the same ID to be passed to this service. And yep. I want to use the same action result. Let's see if we can use get book. Now let's make it fresh. Public action result. No template. Okay, and we want to call it delete. Delete book. And it should have parameter called GeoID. ID. And so first I need to know if this item exists or not. Yep, this makes sense. Give me get book, which is based on this ID. Okay, if book is null, we will say not found. Okay, if book is available, we want to delete that book. So let's call it delete book. Have we implemented delete book interface? Let's go there and figure it out. Where is delete book? No, we have not implemented. So first we need to find the index, and then we are going to get rid of that item. How to find index? Let's use this one. First, I want to find the index of that book. And if it is not null, I want to remove this item. Underscore books and remove it. And I have my index. Find the index. If index is valid, then delete that item. Okay. Let's go to the controller. Let's see. So now it is crying because we have not returned anything. If everything is okay, we want to return it okay. And if it is not okay, we want to return it return not okay. Return not found. So if no book, we want to return not found. If book is there, we want to return okay. Let's see. So so let's first create one more book, which we are going to delete. Okay, let's call it one. Let's call it 25. Or 21, doesn't matter. Let's create one more book, book 2. And let's create one more. So we have created 3 books. Now let's see if we have 3 books in our. Yep, we have 3 plus 1, which was book 0. So now let's try to delete this one. For delete, we have got this delete verb, which is HTTP delete. And this is the right template. This is what we asked. Now let's see, delete. And we got success. Okay, now let's mess with it. We will say, hey, I want to delete 57. It will not have this record. Let's see what happens. And it is saying, hey, this item does not exist. Proper error code and proper messages. Okay, so we put various validation. Let's see if those validations work. I don't want to pass item. Let's see what happens if I want to create this record. It should not work. And we got 400 bad request. Why bad request? Is saying title field is required because we mark those items required. So even if I put title here, if I don't put price, the same thing is going to happen. If I say give me my title, let's say test. I don't want to pass price. Why it is crying? Let's create a fresh title test. Let's execute it. Something went wrong or not working. Just one second. Let me refresh it. Let's see what do we have here. We have a fresh set. Okay, now let me create one record. So it's saying give me the title or price. I don't want to give you title. I just want, okay, I want to give you a title, but not want to give any price. So it's in test book and there is no price. Let's see. It's giving me 200. It should not give me 200. Now let's verify if it has created that record or not. Oh, am I on the right place or not? It created record where it should not. So there is a problem in our validation. Let's see if we have put the required and range keyword or not. And 0 was a we. Okay, now let's see. Let's understand the problem. 0, if it is the numeric, it will automatically convert it into 0. Or so even if we don't pass, it will convert into a 0. So it is passing this criteria as well as this criteria. So let's increase it. I want it to cross at least $1. Now let's see if it is working or not. Because we have updated on book, we have not updated on here. So let's call it. So this is the schema which will, this is the schema which will be used for post request. So now let's see. I do not want to pass title. Oh, I don't want to pass the price. Let's see. I will say, hey, test book. I don't want to give test book. I don't want to give you the price parameter. Show me the error. Bad request. Perfect. This is what you want, and it is giving me the proper message. Price range must be between 1 and 100. So it will. Okay, so let's see if we have covered all 5 cases: create book, update book, delete book, get book, and get book. So, and if I say refresh, we have created 5 services. Okay, so we have covered all the items and we have not passed the original schema. So we are good over here. So now let's. So today we have learned that, why do we need REST API? And for this example, we use .NET. You can build this kind of API using any backend technology like Java, Node.js, or Python, and so on. And we also look into the current version, which is .NET 5 and upcoming version of .NET 6. And we evaluated creating REST API using .NET 6. And we have verified that there is no change in .NET 5 and 6, at least for building REST API. We created 5 services like the way we planned. We created those services in a DB agnostic way because we did not define any kind of logic which is very specific for any DB. We can use relational database, we can use NoSQL database. The only area we have to change is the implementation of that interface. Rest everything will be same. There will not be any change in the API layer. And we saw REST API working with .NET 6. Okay, that's all. Thanks for your time.